The St. John's International Women's Film Festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktamguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded, traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. We acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First People have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Welcome everybody to the St. John's International Film Festival. My name is Tamara Segura, and I'm talking today with Ashley McKenzie, a filmmaker from Cape Breton, that I'm already a big fan of, even though I haven't had the opportunity to chat. Like, I've been looking through your films and I am already a big fan. So this is very exciting to get the opportunity to chat with you and to share some of the insights of your work with our audience. I am going to just give the audience a bit of an introduction about your work. You just released your second feature film, and it premiered at the TIFF Festival, the Toronto International Film Festival, where you also had your first feature film, Werewolf. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. And also premiere at Berlinale. Like, it's really an impressive career. And I'm just seeing you right now, and I'm very happy to see that you are young, and it's very encouraging to see young people being so accomplished already and very inspiring. So I encourage everybody that is watching us to go Google Ashley McKenzie if you don't know her, and just keep track of her career, because I think it's one of the most exciting filmmakers in the country, not just the region. So anyhow, that was a bit long, but totally worth it. I am, like, as I said, very in awe of your work and can't wait to dive in. So I guess that we could start by chatting about how you got involved in filmmaking. How did that came to be? How did you realize that would be the art in which you could express yourself?
Yeah, thanks for the intro. And yeah, I guess the filmmaking process started for me in junior high, I think, and I can't totally explain why, but I remember early in junior high, I wrote down in like one of my classes, when it asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I wrote down filmmaker. And, you know, I don't know, it just felt very clear to me. I never made a film. I don't know why I felt certain enough to write that down, but I did. And it was around that time in my peer group that I was feeling like the things I wanted to spend my time doing were different than what my friends were doing in my small town. And so I started to spend a lot of time alone watching movies, and I felt like that was like a self-schooling process, I guess, for me, and did become a way in which I met the outside world, I guess. Again, living in a small town, I think I learned about the world through cinema, and I can just only guess that became a language that I wanted to use to express myself. And I didn't end up going to film school after, like in university, and I think I was a little bit shy or just didn't quite have the confidence to do it. But I studied English Lit and Film Studies in post-secondary school, and I actually felt like that was the best thing that could have happened to me, and like really prepared me to be a director, because I just took a lot of film theory, history, criticism courses. And the basis of that was literally studying film language. And as a director, I feel like that's what I come back to more than anything, is the language of film. And, you know, studying other films and deconstructing what language those directors were using and why and how it made me feel. Just, yeah, it's just something that I think about constantly. So yeah, I was kind of happy that I ended up taking that route. And yeah, I think that's kind of like the basic process. But then I guess I should mention again that actually translating that into like a practical reality of actually making my first film felt actually a bit harder. I was theoretically a filmmaker in my own mind, but I wasn't in the real world, and trying to figure out how to make a film in my community was hard because I didn't know any other filmmakers. I didn't know where you could get any kind of equipment or any crew. So a big part of me resolving that entailed moving away, and I lived in Halifax for a period and got involved with the Atlantic Filmmakers Cooperative there. And that was my first time meeting a film community, you know, I went through a program there called Film 5 to make my first short film. And so, yeah, I kind of came at it from like a theoretical direction, and then later on like a more hands-on direction.
Yeah, it is very striking for me, because even from your first short films and till your last film, Queens of the Qing Dynasty, is that how you pronounce it? Qing. There is, right from the beginning, there is a very striking, distinctive, formal approach to filmmaking, where the story is just framed and expressed in a way where you can tell that this is a filmmaker that thinks very much about the form, and the narrative kind of like flows with it, and not the other way around, which is like more conventional way of doing it. And I think that we can see an evolution, a perfect evolution of that in your career, that I'm happy to see just like come into full bloom in your latest film. That is the seal of a distinctive director, and it's been there from day one.
No, that's a good point, that it's kind of, maybe it is just that one that comes ahead of the content a little bit, because we're all trained in cinema, like from the day we're born, more or less. Like we're, you know, all consuming images and the whole ideology of it all constantly, but it's almost like at a subconscious level. So I think that was why, it was nice to study it in a more like explicit and intentional way, and deconstructing the language, and so it's more conscious.
Yeah, but that being said, I also think that it's really important that your characters and the place where they come from and the place where you're based as a filmmaker, that's really at the core of your work as well. And these two things come in the service of your films. So I am curious to know how those characters and those places inspire you, and kind of come together in this visual form to just create the films that you've done so far. Where is there a seed like that you are usually more drawn to? Is it a particular location, or is it people in your community that inspires you? How does that work for you when you are writing? Because you are also a writer as well as a director.
Yeah, it's always, I find this kind of question tricky to answer sometimes, because I think this is something that I'm doing very subconsciously, and in some ways it's just as maybe just the basis of who I am, or just the simple decision that I've made to stay in my community as a filmmaker. To me, my project's an organic process, just happens where I'm here, and I curious about people, not in a way where I'm like, I need to go find my next film project. I never think about that. I'm just living my life, and in that process I meet people and I become interested in people, or I develop a friendship with people, or I connect with other artists in the community. Like I just live my daily life, and doing that, it always seems to lead me to this place where I make the decision to start to write a film, I suppose. And it's not something that I'm like intentionally setting out to try to find my next script or anything like that. But I will say that, so I think it's just partly just really tied up in the nature in which I live my life and the nature in which I relate to people and my just innate curiosities. But there is always a moment where I feel like it starts to become concrete, and that's usually when I can hear the character's voice in my head. It's like until I can kind of hear their voice and like visualize them, I feel like it's hard to really write. So, again, if I was to kind of look back, it seems like, oh, okay, I'm connecting with someone in my community, or I'm inspired by, I have these loose ideas, but I haven't written anything down yet. But then it goes deep enough to the point where it feels alive. Maybe I want to try to cast this person in a film, or there's something else about what I'm inspired by that just leads me to like seeing a person in a role or hearing a person as a character. And that's when like the words start coming onto the page like pretty quickly. And once that happens, then generally it just builds from there.
Yeah, I love, like, as I was reading about you, I came across your bio, and it says like you are a filmmaker that makes film in collaboration with the community, which to me is just such a it just gives so much authenticity to the process, and it's something that sometimes in the bigger cities where the industry is tailored from, like, it doesn't really work that way, because finding a community in the first place is just much harder. So I was just wondering about what your community looks like. I've heard it looks a lot like Newfoundland, and culturally they are closer. I've never been, but watching your films, I could definitely feel how they could relate to each other. What inspires you about your community? What keeps you there? What's there? Because you've reached a point in your career where I think you are very accomplished, and you could choose to be somewhere else if you wanted to. But what is it about your community that keeps you there, and you're committed to tell stories from the place?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, I do think that there's like a kinship with Newfoundland. And I know that the first like 10, 12, 15 years ago, like when I saw some Newfoundland features, like, Cracky, Down to the Dirt, like films like that, I definitely felt like I connected with them. I saw my own community in them. And so I do think, like, if you want a bit of the flavor, I think that, there's definitely a similarity there. And I mean, I think, again, I guess my decision to be here isn't just to be here and because my work is connected to here. I think I also just, separate from film making and my film process, I've just decided to be here. And honestly, like, I've just never thought about living anywhere else, or if I have thought about it, the thought didn't last very long. So, this is where I'm at. And I think that, again, is just, I think, something deep inside me that just is connected to this landscape and connected to the people. And it's just, I feel comfortable here. especially right now in my life, I'm like, I'm in a really beautiful spot in nature, close to, a river and the ocean and all those things, and mountains. All those things to me are like really grounding and important. But in terms of like the people that are here and that part of the community, I've always just been so struck by the talent that is here, and like just the characters, separate from even like talent, I guess, which certain has a certain connotation, but just I just feel like the humans that I meet here are just really amazing storytellers. They have a great sense of humor. They're very witty. There's just so much dimension to them, and I think that my films, I think, really show this. And when I'm making my films, I'm always reminded of this, that like there is around every corner, like, whether it's like my neighbor or someone in my family or someone who like walks by on the street while we're shooting a scene, we're always meeting someone who like has a really beautiful ability to perform, and I'm always just impressed that the talent, there's so much talent to discover here. And I think if a lot of the people that I meet were in any other place, if they were in a place where there was like a film industry or opportunities to have a platform for their talents, that they would be really well known and like be doing lots of work like this. But it's just that outlet isn't necessarily here for them, but it doesn't mean that there are people here any less able or talented than people in other places that have, vast resumes or filmographies. And so, yeah, I never doubt that I'm going to be able to find people to collaborate with that are going to really bring the work to life. And yeah, it's always exciting when you just see someone just step into something for the first time and they're just like amazing. It's so fun.
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous of it, because it feels like you are really in a beautiful symbiosis with the people that are around you, and really bringing all your resources together in a way that is meaningful both for you and for the community. There is a quote from, I think it's Leon Tolstoy, the Russian writer, who said, paint your village and you'll be painting the world, which I think it's just so in accordance with what you do, because it's really the particularities of these places and these characters that you capture so well that makes it so humanly relatable for people outside, even if they don't know the place or the people. I think watching your films, I was just thinking, like, what would a Cuban person, I'm originally from Cuba, would think of these films. And definitely there is even though there is a vastly different culture, there will be many things that they could find relatable, because it really goes to the core of what connecting with other people is, and that you do beautifully in your films. I am very, I'm really in awe of the process, and how it takes talent and sensitivity to bring all these people together and to give back to your community, which I think it's a big part of what you do by working with non-actors or getting inspired by your surroundings, right? So I was reading as I was preparing for this conversation about your latest film, the Queens of the Qing Dynasty, and how the process, the inspiration came from your neighbor and a friend. And I just would love for us to talk about it for the people that haven't seen the film and are definitely wanting to. Can you talk about these two characters, how they came to be together in one film?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like Queens of the Qing Dynasty is a really good example of how my being in dialogue with someone in the real world can morph into a project. And in this case, it was like one character, Star, developed from me being in dialogue with someone, and then the second character on was another relationship I formed and another dialogue I started, and then it was me then removing myself from that equation and letting those two characters talk to one another in the film. But the way Star first developed was actually stemmed from the casting process on Werewolf. So that would be in like the summer of 2015. I was casting the role of Nessa in Werewolf, one of the leads, and two teenagers that I auditioned, but didn't end up getting cast. Two of them became a part of my life around that time. And some of the experiences that I had with them, I ended up like spending some time in the hospital with one of them, and with one of the other people, I ended up, spending time trying to help them navigate finding housing, and also some time in the hospital and different types of appointments with social workers and stuff like this. So I think neither of them had much of a support network, and from my connection with them in the audition process, I became one of their supports. And so there's this particular moment in time where I was going through a lot of life experiences with them, and some of what you see in Queens of the Qing Dynasty plot-wise reflects some of those experiences I had. But Star really became like a rich character on the page over time, and that was tied specifically to one of those people that I auditioned to, because she's become one of my closest friends, and just the more time I spent with her, I just was like really intrigued by the way that she sees the world and the way she computes everything around her. It was completely unlike the way that I see things. Maybe not completely unlike, but just I loved her perception of things, and I loved the way she processed everything and expressed everything, and the way she speaks was just like, to me, like poetic and funny and just completely unforgettable. And so I very much just like could always hear her voice in my head, and so that was definitely like the driving force of the writing of the film for a long time. And so the script at that point, I feel like the character that Star is in dialogue with who is like a caretaker of hers while she's in the hospital. That other character, which I'll call the sitter, like a sitter in the hospital, they I would say they were almost like a surrogate for me, and a bit flat. And really that character needed sort of work, and I was like going to enter a phase of trying to develop that character more. And it was around that time someone, Zian, who performs the actual role in the film, they moved across the street from me, and they had just moved to Cape Breton, Unama'ki from Shanghai in order to study business at Cape Breton University. So similarly, I just formed a friendship with them, and a lot of what completely different type of dialogue than I was having with this other friend in my life that inspired Star. But basically, like, that also just enriched that role. And they actually like asked me to cast them in the film. They were like they had so much to express, and really felt like what they were doing in their life was not what they wanted to be doing. They really were like wanting a platform to express themselves. And it just happened to be one of those moments where when someone's like, please cast me in your next film, where I was actually like, okay. this might be able to work, actually. So then I like worked with them as a script consultant, because so much of what I could see bringing it to the film was really linked to their personal experiences. So I first did a rewrite of the script, where I was trying to bring some of their life experience to the role, and then I went through a casting process with them to see if they could then perform it in front of the camera, sort of thing. So that's how it all formed.
That is fascinating. And in the case of Star, the other character, how did the casting process go with this particular character? If this was inspired by the friend that you had done a casting session years before, but this is not the actor. This is a casting process you went through? Okay. That's
correct. So my good friend who I met in the audition process of Werewolf, and who really inspired Star in many ways. I spent years trying to figure out wanting to make a film with her. It didn't work for Werewolf, but then I was like, wanted to make a short film with her. And, at one point, I also felt like she was so creative. And again, I loved the way she saw the world. I loved the photos she would take on social media. So I had given her a camera at one point. I tried a bunch of different ways in order for us to collaborate together and make something. But every time I did it, it just seemed to take all the fun away between our relationship, and it just didn't feel like it was where she was comfortable. And I just felt like the minute I turned the camera on or tried to sign anything or contain anything, it just didn't feel right. So, at a certain point, after trying a few times and trying different ways that maybe would feel good for both her and I just decided, no, we're just going to be friends, and we don't have to work on a film together, sort of thing. But then over time, I did end up, writing something inspired by our friendship. And I was like, the character on the page was like quite vivid. But I was afraid of going through a traditional casting process, because I just again, I could just hear my friend's voice in my head so clearly. I just didn't really know if I was going to be able to find anyone who could quite capture that. But I did, and I was really shocked at how at the performance that Sarah Walker, who plays Star in the film, gives. And we found her just through a traditional casting process in the community, and we first reached out to the theater community in Sydney, which is quite active and has really developed a lot in the past maybe 8 years. So we just reached out to people in that age range, and she was actually the second person we auditioned, and she really everything about Sarah Walker's background and her headshot. Everything seemed so far from the character Star that I really didn't think she was the one. But there was something in her audition right away that actually did get at the right register of the character. But because she seemed so unlike Star, I kept auditioning for several months, and similar to Werewolf, I auditioned people in my community that had no acting experience, and and I also auditioned people in Newfoundland, and I had probably a short list of people that I was really having a tough time figuring out what the right decision was. But I just kept doing follow-up editions and, you know, over and over again until I made the call. And then, yeah, then it just all, then I shared with Sarah Walker, like a lot of workshop material that I had done over the years with my friend, and she was quite comfortable with me sharing that with Sarah. And then Sarah and her were able to spend time together, and they're now good friends. So I think that was like a huge part of Sarah Walker being able to craft such a like specific performance and calibrate it like so precisely. I think was probably like having a lot of those tools. And she has like a really incredible ability, incredible ear, and like control of her voice and body and stuff like that.
Yeah, Sarah Walker is like definitely impressive. And this is a first time actor as well, at least on cinema. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah, both Sarah Walker and Zian Shan are it's both of their film debuts, both leads. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think Sarah is, I am so glad that you follow your instinct with her, because when you bring her on camera and you bring them together, there is just like a truth that is just emanating, and you are just like hypnotized by her tone of voice and her performance. And I really had to Google her, because like the character is a neurodiverse character, and I was like, this is captured so well. As well as the other formal elements in the film, which I love to touch a little bit on that as well, because for me, it was just really going on the subjectivity of a neurodiverse person, which is totally, for me, totally new experience. And I think that you absolutely captured that in a fascinating way that felt almost like inhabiting a parallel universe to me. The sound design, I am blown away. I had to rewatch things like with my headphones, because it's just so detailed, as well as the visual elements are all working together to just take you through the eyes and the interactions of a person that is neurodiverse. And it is also comes so organically and natural, because it feels like it's so in alignment with your previous work, where the style, the visual style, and the sound elements, it feels like a natural evolution from that. So I just would love for you to talk about how the visual and sound design came together with the writing. Is that something you had in mind, perhaps before writing, or at the beginning of the writing, or it's just something that came later in post-production? How did that work for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I spend a lot of time with my films, and I'm involved, you know, as a writer, the director, and then also editor. I was fortunate to have a co-editor work on Queens with me, because it was quite a large project. And but I think, you know, the fact that I spend so much time, years working on it, it often the final result in like the creative decisions, the film techniques, I would say very rarely were they like completely mapped out like at the beginning. And it's usually me working the material like for years that some of these things really form and become developed and fully realized. So it's definitely a process. It's a process of like, yeah, working the material and trying every option, which is something that I tend to do, which can be a bit grueling, but I'm always just, trying to feel things out and figure out what feels right. But at the script stage, you know, the thing that was there very clearly was the dialogue. That was all really scripted, and you know, I think with some of my past work, there was very minimal dialogue, or maybe a bit that would often get, you know, pruned even further in the edit. And with this film, you know, it was all, also in the past, I've done maybe more improvising. But yeah, the words on the page were all pretty crystal clear from the beginning. And so that was there, and the visual style and the sound design, that all just developed, like, you know, from maybe like a tiny idea and now to a full-fledged like thing over the course of 4 or 5 years. But, you know, in retrospect, when I'm trying to like really put words to like what are a lot of just like gut decisions, like, and maybe that's partially because I'm working like with a very small team in a remote place, like I'm able to often like make a lot of like instinctual decisions. I'm not often having to like explain everything that I'm doing to someone, because sometimes I'm alone, or sometimes I'm working with 1 or 2 other people that we're like all in it on the same wavelength together. So it's not always like something that needs to be perfectly articulated. It can be something that is just like, you know, trusting our guts, or myself trusting my gut, and like, and then trying to like build on that. So I think, you know, when I look back at it, you know, I think the most important thing is that, you know, it is a story about 2 characters that experience the world in like a different way, and a different, not in a way that's like, there's, you know, such variation in how humans experience things, and such variation in the way humans can feel and form relationships. And yet in cinema, I think the form that film takes is usually just, you know, presents one way. So I think so much of like what the form of this film has become stems from the fact that, you know, the whole time I'm trying to like bring these 2 characters to life, and in as dimensional a way as possible, and authentic a way as possible. So it makes total sense to me that the form of the film became like a bit atypical, and that the form had to like expand and be a bit different than the narrative kind of schema that we're all sort of used to. It's sort of like, I think you can feel the edges of the storytelling mode that we're all trained to receive. It's like I'm pushing at those boundaries and trying to like expand them, because the characters were being a bit suffocated, if, you know, in trying to fit them into a regular normative structure. It really wasn't capturing what they had to offer. So that's, I know, maybe a bit abstract, but it's like there's so many like little creative decisions, I guess, that, you know, aren't in a lot of ways too radical. I'm still using like basic film language, classical film language. I'm still doing like, you know, shot reverse shots, and I have wide shots, and I have extreme close shots, but, you know, I'm disrupting a little bit the classical mode just in simple ways. Maybe I'm arranging those shot patterns just slightly differently. Maybe I'm lingering on a shot, the duration of a shot. I'm, you know, staying with something longer than is typical. So it's like, it's this very similar like syntax and that we're used to, but I'm just, I think, maybe using it in a bit of a different way to hopefully create a sense of the character's subjectivity, and to like enter into the world and be transported to, and as you sort of say, an alternate kind of dimension to some degree.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating, because yes, it is disruptive of like a more conventional way of filmmaking, but it's an absolute alignment and in the service of the characters and these big themes that you are touching on through the eyes of people that perceives and interacts with the world differently. So congratulations. I am very big fan of your work. I can wait to see what comes next. I'm not gonna ask what comes next, because sometimes it's like people is like, what are you doing? And it's like, I just finished doing something huge, like I need a break. So I'm not gonna ask you that. And I think we're actually but yeah, congratulations, and I'm sure you'll have a wonderful round of festivals that is just started like magnificently at TIFF and Berlinale. So congrats, and thank you for sharing your time with us. Yeah, all the best.
Very happy to. I love the St. John's Women's Film Festival. They're one of the first festivals to screen my work, and I remember going there and just meeting so many amazing people. And it just, I feel definitely a lot of affinity with the filmmakers there and the community there, and always like love what you're all doing. So congrats, and thanks for chatting with me, and thanks for all the lovely questions.
Thank you.